A man's true character is revealed not in how he climbs, but in what or who he chooses to leave behind. A hush settled over the lavish ballroom, tension shimmering beneath glow of crystal chandeliers as all eyes turned to the center of the grand event. There stood Marcus Delaney, a self-made millionaire in a tailored tuxedo, smugly presenting his striking mistress to the elite guests of the evening. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the sheer boldness of the act, followed by hurried whispers in hidden corners of the room. Behind the towering doors, Lila stood frozen for a breath, her heart pounding not from nerves, but from the deep, familiar sting of betrayal. The warmth of the room seemed to vanish the moment she saw him, Marcus, smiling as if nothing he did could touch her. She tightened her grip on the crook of Logan's arm, her other hand resting instinctively on the swell of her belly. The baby stirred faintly, a reminder of what she was really fighting for. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about showing their child that silence wasn't the same as strength. Then, the doors burst open. In walked a visibly pregnant young woman, Marcus's wife Lila. But that wasn't the only shock. Walking beside her, with quiet authority and unwavering presence, was Logan Pierce, the famously reclusive billionaire CEO known for his ironclad discretion and massive philanthropic ventures. His protective stance beside Lila made it clear she would not face this alone. The atmosphere bristled with scandal, and no one in the room would walk away untouched. The Imperial Lexington Hotel boasted one of the largest and most luxurious ballrooms in Boston. Marble floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting towering floral arrangements flown in from Florence, their fragrance lingering delicately in the air. Hundreds of guests in couture gowns and bespoke suits drifted about, exchanging air kisses and murmuring about hedge funds, art auctions, and emerging tech giants. This was the annual New Horizons Gala, a staple of the city's upper crust, dedicated to raising millions for children's literacy programs. Marcus Delaney, the evening's celebrated host, was a man who commanded attention. Tall, confident, with a voice that filled any space, he was the perfect embodiment of ambition. Years ago, he'd been a mid-level analyst at Sinex Data. But a mix of timing and rumored backdoor deals allowed him to acquire a crumbling fintech startup and convert it into a dominant force in the digital economy. By 36, his wealth had ballooned into 9 figures. But tonight, it wasn't just his money-making headlines. It was his arrogance. Amid the glittering chandeliers and live orchestra performing Vivaldi, Marcus walked out proudly with a beautiful brunette clutching his arm. Her name? Bianca Moreau. Rumors about her had circulated for months. Some claimed she was his latest public relations hire. Others suspected a mysterious heiress from Monaco. But the glint in Marcus's eye told a much juicier story. Bianca wore a form-fitting scarlet gown that turned heads and sparked murmurs the instant she appeared. The bold choice spoke volumes, especially since everyone in the room knew Marcus was married. Still, his wife, Lila Delaney, was noticeably absent. Marcus tapped the microphone, his voice cutting clearly through the low hum of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here at the New Horizons Gala. We have an incredible evening lined up, with a thrilling announcement later tonight. Please enjoy yourselves. And remember, every dollar raised tonight goes directly toward expanding opportunities for our next generation." He extended his arm to Bianca, leading her gracefully down the stage steps. They were instantly surrounded by some of Boston's most powerful figures. Among them was Richard Callaway, CEO of Callaway Maritime, who clapped Marcus on the shoulder and quirked a brow toward Bianca. "Well, you don't waste any time, do you?" Richard muttered under his breath, just loud enough for nearby listeners to catch. Marcus merely smirked. He relished this kind of attention, skirting the edge of scandal, feeding on whispered speculation and barely concealed envy. It was a game to him, one he believed he had mastered, controlling perception, orchestrating charm, commanding loyalty. He thought himself untouchable. But what Marcus didn't realize was that the scene he had so meticulously choreographed was about to unravel faster than he could imagine. Lila, his wife, now 6 months pregnant, was already en route. And not alone. At her side was Logan Pierce, the reclusive billionaire CEO, long rumored to bankroll secretive humanitarian efforts around the globe. Marcus believed tonight would be his triumph. In truth, fate and consequence were already closing in. Hours before the gala, Lila Delaney sat in the sun-drenched living room of their expansive estate on the edge of Cambridge. The grand property, with its towering columns and sweeping drive, was the crown jewel of Marcus's public success. But to Lila, it had grown hollow. She no longer found solace in its airy hallways or curated gardens. At 6 months pregnant, the cracks in their marriage had deepened. The man who once massaged her swollen feet and brought her late-night cravings now barely shared a bed with her. He was perpetually at meetings, dinners that often stretched into the early hours. Lila had convinced herself it was temporary, just business stress. She'd replayed old conversations in her head, grasping for fragments of the man she married. But his voice now lived more in her voicemail than across their breakfast table. Even the house felt colder. No longer a home, just a gallery of everything she was expected to smile through. But the truth had become harder to ignore. She'd planned to skip the gala entirely. Emotionally drained and physically exhausted, she had no interest in playing the poised socialite. Her instincts told her to stay home. But then the phone rang. Natalie Benton, her childhood friend and longtime legal advisor at Marcus's firm, was on the line. Her voice shook as she pleaded. "Lila, I don't want to scare you, but Marcus, he's bringing someone tonight. Someone he's been seeing. You need to be there," Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with fear over the consequences of revealing the truth. Lila's heart pounded as she listened, one hand instinctively moving to cradle her stomach. She had long suspected Marcus of cheating, but the idea of him flaunting another woman, publicly, at a charity gala, was more than she could bear. A storm of emotions swirled within her. Anger, pain, betrayal. She ended the call without a word, her eyes brimming. For the next hour, Lila stood silently at the window of her ornate living room. The setting sun painted the sky with streaks of amber, casting light on the rose bushes Marcus had once planted for her, back when everything felt real. So much had changed. Each breath felt heavier than the last, weighted with memories she couldn't escape. His laughter echoing down these hallways, whispered promises exchanged over wine and candlelight. Now, those same walls bore witness to her solitude. She pressed her hand against the glass, fingers curling into a tight fist as rage burned through her. Just then, Bernard, her butler, cleared his throat gently. "You have a visitor, ma'am." Startled, Lila turned and froze. It was Logan Pierce. He stepped into the room, his presence both unexpected and grounding. Years ago, he had mentored Marcus and, through that connection, built a friendship with Lila. But as time passed, Logan had withdrawn from public view, becoming more myth than man in elite circles. "Lila," he said softly, concern etched into every line of his face. "I've heard some troubling things about Marcus. I came to see if you're all right." Her tears spilled freely now. "He's parading her tonight, in front of everyone. I can't believe he would do this. Not now." Logan hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You shouldn't go through this alone. If you choose to face him, I'll stand with you. You have my full support." Lila's breathing steadied. Her sorrow began to harden into resolve. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about protecting the life she carried, showing her unborn child that strength could bloom even from heartbreak. She would no longer play the quiet, obedient wife. If Marcus was ready to showcase his affair to the city's most powerful, then she would confront him, head on, and she would not walk in alone. Within 2 hours, Lila emerged from her room dressed in an elegant, midnight blue maternity gown. She paused before the mirror, the faint glow of pregnancy and sheer determination giving her reflection a new kind of beauty. Strength surged through her. She stepped into Logan's sleek black Bentley, and together they departed for the gala, unaware that their arrival would trigger a cascade of consequences no one could stop. Meanwhile, Bianca Moreau was no stranger to the seductive pull of wealth and power. Born as Becca Marsh in a working-class neighborhood outside Marseille, she learned early how swiftly fortune could turn. When she was 12, her father lost his job, and her mother's battle with a chronic illness drained every reserve they had. Debt piled up. Desperation settled in. That was the moment Bianca vowed never to be powerless again. In her late teens, she recognized her strongest assets: a quick mind, sharp instincts, and a beauty that turned heads. By 20, she was dating older, successful men, each relationship propelling her higher. Every man taught her something new about leverage, power, and how to make connections work in her favor. Bianca soon realized that in high society, money wasn't the only currency. Secrets were worth more. She learned to uncover them, use them, and protect her own. After a series of well-timed relationships, each ending with a financial cushion, she took her ambitions international. From yacht galas in Monaco to rooftop fundraisers in Hong Kong and private villas in Dubai, she mastered the art of being everywhere without leaving a trace. Eventually, she landed in the United States. First, she aligned herself with Robert Blaine, a real estate magnate in Manhattan. Then, a shipping tycoon in Los Angeles. But Bianca was never looking for permanence with them. They were stepping stones. She wanted someone who shared her hunger, someone powerful enough to pull her into the inner circle, not just as an ornament, but as a presence. Then she met Marcus Delaney at a private investor summit in San Francisco. It wasn't his looks that drew her in, though he was handsome. It was the way he moved, how he spoke, how the air shifted when he entered a room. He was restless, brilliant, and just arrogant enough to believe the world would bend to his will. Their flirtation was subtle at first. Quiet drinks in hotel bars, shared rides to overpriced dinners, whispers over rare scotch in dimly lit lounges. Bianca found herself fascinated, not just by his ambition, but by the fire in his eyes. He wasn't just wealthy, he was poised for something bigger. And Marcus, already drifting from his perfect wife, was equally captivated. Bianca's intelligence and worldliness thrilled him. She could discuss IPOs and foreign policy one moment, then charm an entire circle of venture capitalists the next. But Bianca had no intention of remaining his secret forever. She didn't want to linger in the background, waiting in hotel rooms while he played the doting husband. She wanted visibility, power, her own seat at the table. So when Marcus invited her to the New Horizons gala, she didn't hesitate. He framed it as their debut, as Boston's next power couple. He never mentioned how he intended to explain Lila's absence. Bianca didn't press. She welcomed the chance to be admired, even envied, by the most influential people in the city. She also suspected. She hoped Marcus would soon propose an even more rewarding arrangement. Standing beside him on stage, Bianca Moreau felt as though she had finally arrived. The murmurs of scandalized guests only fed her ego. This night was her moment, a launchpad to ascend even higher among Boston's elite. What she didn't expect was the abrupt arrival of the one woman whose life she intended to replace, escorted no less by one of the few men capable of outshining Marcus Delaney. Long before Marcus Delaney wore bespoke suits and flashed seven-figure smiles to reporters, he was just Mark, from the outskirts of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Born to diligent, middle-class parents, Marcus had shown an instinct for persuasion early on. He was the kid who transformed a lemonade stand into a neighborhood franchise, roping in other kids with promises of shared profits. Through scholarships and part-time jobs, he earned his way into a reputable business school where ambition crystallized into obsession. Marcus entered every competition, joined every student entrepreneurship group, and networked like his life depended on it. Peers admired him, but many whispered behind closed doors that he was too ruthless, too driven. He didn't care. For Marcus, fear and sacrifice were necessary companions on the road to greatness. He rarely slept more than a few hours, subsisting on caffeine and sheer will. Every late-night study session, every rejection, only fueled his resolve, because failure, to him, was never an option. After graduation, he landed an entry-level job at Nexora, a modest but promising tech firm. His intensity caught the attention of senior executives, who quickly funneled him into roles demanding high-stakes decision-making and lightning-fast execution. In those formative years, Marcus built a lean but loyal circle of mentors. One of them was Logan Pierce. At the time, Logan was a respected venture capitalist, known for his strategic mind and calm under pressure. He took Marcus under his wing, inviting him to critical pitch meetings and deal rooms, where Marcus learned how to read subtle cues, sway stakeholders, and navigate tight spots. But as Marcus climbed, so did his ego. A pivotal shift occurred when he caught wind of a struggling startup focused on machine learning tools for e-commerce. While others dismissed it as a high-risk gamble, Marcus saw a golden ticket. Pooling his savings and coaxing funds from smaller investors, he acquired the company for a sliver of its potential worth. Over the next few years, he redirected its vision, pivoting toward predictive analytics for major retailers. The gamble paid off. Global contracts rolled in. His net worth soared. Luxury events, private jet weekends, and prime real estate followed in quick succession. Yet even amid the decadence, there were moments when he wondered if it all felt as good as he imagined. Success had come quickly, but it brought a gnawing emptiness he couldn't name. And then came Lila. They met when she was consulting for an HR solutions firm at a leadership forum where Marcus was the keynote speaker. Her sincerity, warmth, and calm presence slipped past the hardened armor his ambition had built. They fell in love quickly, and even Logan Pierce, who had grown increasingly uneasy with Marcus's aggressive business style, was moved by how Lila seemed to soften him. For a while, Marcus truly seemed happy. Their wedding had been a high society spectacle, elegant, exclusive, and splashed across the pages of every lifestyle magazine in the region. But Marcus's success never plateaued. In fact, it only intensified his appetite. He dove headfirst into international expansion, brokering deals in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. It became common for him to return home well past midnight, if at all. The affection he had once lavished on Lila faded, replaced by a simmering restlessness. He began to view her gentle nudges toward work-life balance as nagging restraints, barriers to the legacy he was so desperate to build. Then came Bianca Moreau. Her ruthless ambition mirrored his. Their affair offered a heady escape from the quiet routines of married life, which Marcus had come to see as an anchor dragging him down. And so, on the night of the New Horizons gala, he was prepared to make a very public statement, with Bianca on his arm. But somewhere behind the gleam of his polished image, the man he used to be, the hard-working, bright-eyed optimist who once doted on Lila, still flickered faintly. The question was whether that ghost of conscience would mean anything once he came face to face with his pregnant wife, flanked by the very man who had once been his mentor. During the tense ride to the Imperial Lexington Hotel, Lila inhaled slowly, centering herself. She would not walk in broken. She wanted to enter poised, composed, even regal. For too long, she had been the patient wife, tolerant, understanding, endlessly forgiving. Tonight, that version of her would be laid to rest. Seated beside her in the quiet of the black Bentley, Logan glanced over and asked gently, "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Confronting Marcus, in front of all of them, it won't be easy. Lila's hands rested over her belly, her posture unshakable. "I have to. If I don't face him, he wins. I'm not disappearing quietly, not anymore." From her clutch she withdrew a manila folder, thick, with documents neatly organized inside. Her secret weapon. Over the past month, when her suspicions about Marcus had grown too strong to ignore, she'd hired a private investigator, not only to confirm the affair, but to dig deeper into his business dealings. The results had arrived just days earlier, and they left her stunned. Fraudulent wire transfers, hidden shell corporations, undisclosed offshore accounts. Marcus was playing a dangerous game with the law, and if exposed, the fallout would be catastrophic. But Lila wasn't trying to destroy him. Not yet. She just wanted him to understand she wasn't naive. She wouldn't be brushed aside in some quiet post-affair divorce settlement. This was her leverage, her insurance for herself and the child they were expecting. Logan glanced at the folder, noting the financial statements and government seals. He understood exactly what it meant. His expression darkened. "This is serious. If the SEC or any other agency saw these documents..." Lila pressed her lips together. "I know. But it's the only leverage I have. I don't plan to go public, unless he leaves me no choice. For once, he's going to be held accountable for what he's done." Logan nodded, the look on his face a blend of respect and concern. Once, he had seen Marcus as a protege, a young man bursting with promise who might reshape the future. Now that same man teetered on the edge of scandal and possibly a criminal indictment. Still, Logan's loyalty no longer lay with Marcus. It belonged to Lila and the child she carried. He held on to a faint hope that tonight's confrontation might jar Marcus back into decency. But he wasn't betting on it. As the Bentley pulled up to the hotel's entrance, cameras exploded in flashes of light. The paparazzi had gathered, expecting influencers and public figures. But when Logan Pierce stepped out of the car, followed by Marcus Delaney's visibly pregnant wife, the energy shifted in an instant. Microphones jutted forward, cameras clicked, questions rang out in a chaotic chorus. Lila took one deep, centering breath, placed her hand in Logan's, and let him lead her up the red carpet. Inside the lobby, she could feel the electricity in the air, the shift in conversation, the widening eyes, the flurry of whispers. Every head turned their way. Her heart thundered, but her expression didn't flinch. Her eyes remained steady, sharp with intent. Soon she would come face to face with Marcus and Bianca. And when that moment arrived, she would not crumble. She would stand, armed with truth and a plan to reclaim her dignity. Logan Pierce's name still carried quiet weight in elite circles. 10 years earlier, Blackwell Capital, his investment firm, had disrupted the tech world by funding trailblazing startups in AI and e-commerce. His reputation for recognizing billion-dollar ideas before they bloomed made him a legend in the venture capital world. But everything changed after tragedy struck. His younger sister's fatal car crash devastated him. Overnight, he disappeared from the public eye, stepping back from finance and turning toward global philanthropy in underserved communities. His return to the spotlight tonight was seismic, and walking beside Lila Delaney, no less. Speculation rippled through the ballroom. Were they romantically involved? Was this a sign of some powerful alliance forming behind the scenes? Others murmured reminders that Logan had once mentored Marcus, adding another complicated layer to the scandal unfolding before their eyes. From the moment he entered, Logan commanded the room. Tall, poised, and impeccably dressed, his composed presence stood in sharp contrast to Marcus's flashier, performative style. Where Marcus flaunted the bold confidence of new wealth, Logan exuded understated elegance, the quiet strength of legacy. He ushered Lila through the crowd, waving off reporters with practiced ease and keeping his focus entirely on her. And Lila, despite the hundreds of eyes and buzzing speculation, felt steady, grounded, protected. The anxiety that had gripped her earlier faded. What replaced it was resolve. Together, they made a striking pair, an image of resilience and quiet power. The expectant wife, wronged but unbroken, flanked by a man whose presence alone could silence a room. Across the ballroom, Marcus and Bianca were in mid-conversation with Richard Calloway and a cluster of high-profile investors when Marcus caught sight of Lila, standing beside Logan Pierce. His confident smirk faltered, just for a moment. A flash of panic crossed his eyes before he quickly composed himself, pasting a taut smile across his face. But Bianca felt it, the sudden stiffness in his grip as his hand clamped around her elbow. "Logan's here," Marcus muttered, his voice tight. Bianca arched an eyebrow. "And who exactly is he to you?" "My former mentor," Marcus said, almost under his breath. "And that's my wife, with him." From across the ballroom, Logan locked eyes with Marcus and offered a small, cordial nod, one that carried a quiet undertone of disapproval. Beside him, Lila lifted her chin ever so slightly in a gesture of poised defiance. She wasn't going to wait for the confrontation to find her. Bianca, sharp as ever, instantly sensed the deeper implications. If Logan Pierce was involved, this was no petty domestic dispute. Marcus exhaled and shook off the momentary shock. Sliding a hand around Bianca's waist, he guided her forward with forced ease. As they approached, murmurs rippled across the room, and a hush slowly descended as the two pairs closed the distance. Now standing within arm's reach, the tension between them was palpable, like static before a storm. Marcus broke the silence first, forcing a smile. "Lila, I didn't know you'd be attending tonight." His eyes flicked to Logan and then back. "And you've brought quite the guest." Lila's expression was neutral, her tone steady. "Good evening, Marcus. I hope we're not interrupting your big moment." At that, Logan offered the smallest of nods, a quiet signal of solidarity. He was right where he said he'd be, by her side. And so the confrontation began. Whispers swirled like wind in a coliseum. Onlookers watched with rapt attention, sensing the undercurrents of scandal unfolding in real time. There they stood, Marcus Delaney and his pregnant wife, now adversaries on opposite ends of a ruined marriage, each supported by a partner, each exuding their own brand of strength. In the background, the gala's string quartet continued to play, but the music felt off, eerie, almost mocking in its lightness compared to the gravity in the air. Lila's heart pounded. As she looked into Marcus's eyes, memories crashed into her like waves, of their wedding, of cozy nights curled up on the couch, of the joyful gasp when they'd learned she was pregnant. But the man before her now felt like a stranger. Marcus summoned his trademark charm. "You look stunning, Lila. I'm surprised you're here. I thought you were resting tonight." His attempt at small talk was almost laughable. But Bianca, her arm draped around his, chimed in sweetly, "Marcus invited me to help co-host tonight. It's such an important evening for the New Horizons Foundation, and I'm deeply passionate about philanthropy." Her syrupy tone only made Lila's anger swell. She felt her nails dig into her palms but kept her voice composed. "How thoughtful of you, Bianca. I'm sure your passion for Marcus's affairs extends far beyond philanthropy." A low ripple moved through the watching crowd. Bianca stiffened, her smile faltering as a flash of irritation darted through her eyes. Marcus's own grin vanished, replaced by a hard glare meant to intimidate. But if he thought Lila would shrink under that look, he was sorely mistaken. She turned directly to him. "I came here because I have every right to see who you've decided to parade in front of the city, Marcus, and to remind you that neither I nor our child will be pushed aside." Beside her, Logan placed a firm, grounding hand on her arm. He spoke calmly, but with unmistakable authority. "Marcus, I'm disappointed. This isn't the man I once mentored. Publicly humiliating your wife, it's beneath you, beneath everything we once stood for." Marcus's jaw tightened. For a brief second, he looked as though he might break, his pupils dilated, his lips twitching with a conflict he couldn't quite hide. Logan's words didn't just sting, they echoed. Somewhere in Marcus's memory, buried beneath ego and defiance, was the younger version of himself, who once sought Logan's approval like oxygen. But the walls he'd built over the years, layered with ambition, fear, and pride, rose quickly again. There was something in Logan's voice, something that pierced through the haze of ego and sparked a flicker of guilt. But only for a second. Then his face hardened again, his gaze darting across the sea of onlookers. His reputation was still the priority. "I think we should take this somewhere private," Marcus muttered, lowering his voice. "Lila? Logan. Let's step out onto the terrace." The crowd instinctively parted, eyes wide and silent as the four made their way toward the grand double doors. A few bold onlookers followed discreetly behind, eager not to miss the next act in the unfolding scandal. Inside, the ballroom quieted, but the whispers and feverish texts carried on. Outside, the terrace overlooked the glittering skyline. Cool air drifted in, but it did nothing to ease the tension crackling between them. Marcus turned sharply to Lila, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why bring Logan into this? Why humiliate me like this in front of everyone?" Lila's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice remained strong. "Humiliate you?" she snapped. "You're the one flaunting a mistress in public while I'm carrying your child. Did you really think I would stand by and say nothing?" Lila's voice cut through the evening air. Bianca opened her mouth to speak, but Logan silenced her with a sharp, unwavering stare. He turned to Marcus. "If you still have any respect for Lila, you'll handle this with the dignity she deserves." For a brief moment, Marcus's shoulders dropped and a flicker of remorse surfaced on his face. In that fleeting second, something old stirred in him. Memories of midnight talks with Lila, of promises made before ambition corroded everything. But the weight of the woman clinging to his arm and the stares pressing in from every direction pushed the moment aside. But then, Bianca slipped her hand around his arm, a quiet but powerful reminder of the choices he had made. Marcus stood frozen, trapped between shame and stubborn pride, with the entire room, and more importantly Lila, watching to see which man he would choose to be. In the end, the confrontation was mercifully brief. Bianca played the outraged girlfriend well, though to many, her frustration seemed driven more by the threat to her own position than by any real affection for Marcus. Lila, eyes stinging, turned away before Bianca could witness her pain. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but it couldn't numb the ache in her chest. Even now, part of her wished Marcus would run after her, apologize, say anything to show that she still mattered. But silence filled the space behind her, and that silence told her everything. Logan guided her away from the terrace, giving her the most dignified exit possible from what had been a thoroughly humiliating ordeal. As they stepped back inside the ballroom, the energy shifted. Dozens of eyes tracked them. Conversations lowered to murmurs, Phones lit up, capturing photos, no doubt feeding the spreading scandal. Lila's pulse raced, a mix of heartbreak, fury, and an unfamiliar, empowering determination. She leaned slightly on Logan's arm, grateful for his steady presence. Meanwhile, Marcus and Bianca remained behind, the space between them crackling with tension. Bianca hissed, "That was humiliating. You should have warned me your wife might show up, pregnant and with Logan Pierce of all people." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling, "I had no idea she was coming. Believe me, this wasn't how I planned it." He shot her a glare. "And don't forget, you were the one who pushed to go public. Well, this is what happens." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "So now it's my fault?" "Did you see the way Logan looked at you? At both of us? He could ruin you. You'd better hope he doesn't decide to start poking around in your finances, or your company." A flicker of fear crossed Marcus's face. She was right. If Logan used his reach and resources to dig into his affairs, the consequences could be devastating. With a sharp inhale, Marcus composed himself and straightened his jacket. "Let's not create a bigger scene. We'll finish our duties here, then talk privately about next steps." Inside, the gala carried on. The MC returned to the stage, inviting donors to pledge their support. Applause rang out as astronomical donations flashed across the screens. But beneath the glossy veneer of charity and high society, the real spectacle of the night was already dominating every corner of social media. Photos of Lila and Logan's dramatic entrance spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded. CEO Logan Pierce supports pregnant wife of Marcus Delaney amid scandal. Billionaire love triangle unfolds at New Horizons gala. In a quiet corner by the refreshments, Logan found a secluded spot for them. A few acquaintances offered polite concern. Most kept their distance. Lila accepted a glass of water from a waiter, though she could barely hold it. Her fingers trembled as they touched the rim of the glass. Despite the warmth of the packed ballroom, Lila felt cold. Logan leaned in, his voice low and meant only for her. "I'm proud of you for standing your ground, but I'm concerned. This much stress isn't good for you. Maybe we should go." Lila hesitated. She was emotionally exhausted, her body aching from tension, but something deep within her resisted the idea of walking away. "I need him to see that he doesn't get to scare me off," she said quietly. "I'll stay, at least until the main program wraps." Logan gave a soft nod, respecting her choice. In truth, his admiration for her had only grown. A flicker of guilt tugged at him. He had once played a role in Marcus's rise, never imagining how deeply power would twist him. Now, Logan silently vowed to protect Lila from whatever came next. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere inside the gala took on an electric edge. Everyone wondered, would Lila leave in tears, or would she remain composed? Would Marcus's social standing crumble, or would his fortune and influence shield him from the fallout? Just then, as Lila moved a few steps further into the room, a familiar voice reached her ears. She turned slightly and saw Elise Hawthorne, a longtime socialite and one of Marcus's former allies, smirking from the far side of the ballroom. Elise whispered something to a companion, and though Lila couldn't make out the words, the pointed glance they cast in her direction was enough. Her chest tightened. A low hum of whispers seemed to follow her now, each one a reminder of the judgment she feared. Her breath caught unexpectedly, and for a brief moment, the strength she'd fought so hard to summon wavered. Her fingers dug into the satin of her clutch. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe this was a mistake. Her heart raced. She scanned for the nearest exit. But then, Logan's hand brushed gently against the small of her back, grounding her. She inhaled slowly. The heat in her face cooled. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That single quiet gesture was enough to pull her back. Her shoulders straightened, and with renewed poise, she stepped forward again. Only time, and perhaps Logan Pierce's next move would tell. In the days after the gala, the city buzzed with scandal. Tabloids ran wild with headlines like "Billionaire Showdown at New Horizons" and "Wife versus Mistress, a Night of Reckoning." Gossip columns recounted the confrontation, often quoting anonymous sources who relished every detail of Marcus's brazen display. Lila, though humiliated, found comfort in the outpouring of support. Messages came flooding in, old friends, distant acquaintances, even strangers expressing outrage and empathy. Amid the chaos, an unexpected group of allies rallied around her. The first was Natalie Cruz. her childhood friend and legal advisor within Marcus's company, Natalie had been the one to warn her. But she didn't stop there. She helped Lila schedule meetings with the top divorce attorneys in Boston and assisted in gathering more damning evidence related to Marcus's shady business dealings. If this turned into a legal war, Lila wouldn't walk in unprepared. Then came Marianne DuPont, a respected philanthropist who had mentored Lila in her early days in public relations. Marianne had always admired her warmth and commitment to community causes. Outraged by Marcus's betrayal, she mobilized her influence in elite circles. Anytime Marcus tried to suggest Lila was overreacting or emotionally unstable, he was met with silent resistance from key society figures, all carefully managed by Marianne. But perhaps the most surprising supporter came from someone Lila least expected: Richard Calloway. Richard Calloway, once one of Marcus Delaney's closest allies, had been deeply unsettled by the public spectacle he had witnessed at the gala. After seeing Lila's humiliation unfold firsthand, he reached out to Logan Pierce, expressing disbelief over Marcus's conduct and offering to connect Lila with discreet financial experts. These professionals could quietly assess Marcus's holdings to ensure Lila's rights would be secure, should she pursue legal separation. The unexpected wave of support left Lila both overwhelmed and deeply moved. Where she had once feared being alone and vulnerable in her pregnancy, she now found herself surrounded by a network of capable, caring allies. The illusion of helplessness that Marcus had relied on to keep her in check crumbled quickly. She realized something important: her position wasn't as fragile as Marcus had assumed. Meanwhile, Logan maintained steady contact. He visited her at the estate, checking in on her emotional well-being and that of the child growing within her. His quiet strength became a calming presence in Lila's life. Of course, some corners of the media didn't resist painting a more salacious picture. Tabloids speculated about a secret romance, casting Logan as the gallant billionaire who had stolen a rival's wife. But Lila ignored the gossip. She trusted Logan implicitly. To her, his actions weren't driven by attraction or scandal, but by principle. He was a man committed to setting wrongs right. Marcus's reaction to this growing alliance was a volatile mix of fury and paranoia. Bianca stoked his anxiety, warning him that Lila was building a legal arsenal. Marcus responded with desperation: late-night calls to attorneys, frantic reviews of past transactions, and efforts to obscure illicit financial trails. He even hired a private investigator to sniff out the source of the leaks. But with each attempt to control the narrative, things slipped further from his grasp. Every public appearance he staged with Bianca backfired. The press inevitably referenced Lila's composure and Logan's philanthropic legacy, drowning out whatever message Marcus tried to deliver. Investors started to get jittery. Whispers about instability and scandal began to taint Marcus's future deals. Behind closed doors, tension mounted. The question now wasn't if a reckoning would come. It was when and who would hold the cards when the house finally collapsed. For Marcus Delaney, the first sign of impending disaster arrived in the form of a terse letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They were requesting documentation tied to several offshore accounts, ones he had foolishly believed were hidden beneath layers of shell companies and corporate fronts. Someone had tipped them off. He didn't know for certain who it was, but he suspected either Logan or Natalie. Marcus's paranoia surged, leaving him restless and sleepless. Nights became a blur of frantic calls to his legal team. The SEC inquiry loomed over him like a guillotine. And as if that weren't enough, his relationship with Bianca began to unravel. She had not signed up to be tethered to a man under federal investigation, especially one whose fortune might be frozen or seized if the accusations held weight. She began missing dinners, citing sudden urgent business trips. The spark that once ignited their connection now fizzled under the weight of mutual blame. Accusations replaced affection. Bianca made it clear: if Marcus's empire showed signs of collapse, she had no intention of going down with the ship. What once felt like power now felt like a cage. Marcus could sense Bianca pulling away, not just physically, but emotionally. Each unanswered call, each vague excuse chipped away at the illusion that he was still in control. And though he had never loved her in the way he once loved Lila, the sting of abandonment was sharp, especially now. especially when everything else was crumbling too. Trapped between the threat of legal ruin and a mistress growing increasingly distant, Marcus's once pristine image began to fracture. His behavior grew erratic. Employees whispered behind closed doors about impulsive firings and last-minute cancellations. A public outburst in front of major investors only deepened concerns about his mental state. Meanwhile, Lila was methodically building her case. With Natalie's help, she gathered every document, every message, every image that could support claims of Marcus's misconduct, both professionally and personally. Part of her burned for justice, to expose him fully and force him to face consequences. But another part remembered the man she had once loved. She wasn't blind to the cost of complete destruction. Their child would one day ask about their father, and what could she say? That he was only the villain? That he had no redemption? Deep down, she didn't want her child to carry only the weight of disgrace. If there was a way to preserve a fragment of dignity for Marcus, as a father, if not as a husband, she would try, but not at the expense of her own worth. Still, her child's future came first. Lila instructed her attorneys to prepare a sealed divorce petition. It would only be filed if Marcus refused to negotiate a fair settlement. If he tried to maneuver around the law or cheat her out of what was rightfully hers and the baby's, she would not hesitate. Logan continued to be her steady protector. Quietly, he tapped into his vast network of private investigators. More layers of Marcus's corruption surfaced: undeclared international assets, insider trading, bribery involving offshore firms. Logan never pushed for vengeance, but he believed deeply in integrity and in consequences. As whispers of Marcus's unraveling spread, board members at his company began to question his leadership. The possibility of a forced transition in power was floated, softly at first, then more openly. It only deepened Marcus's sense of unraveling. His control over his company, his reputation, and over Lila, the woman he had once taken for granted, was slipping. Then one evening, Bianca left, without ceremony, without confrontation, just a terse note on the counter. She refused to tie her future to a man in free fall. Marcus stared at the empty closet where her belongings had been. A strange cocktail of betrayal and bitter relief flooded him. At least she was out of the picture. But her departure left Marcus Delaney alone to face the full fury of the storm he had conjured. As he stood in his penthouse, now too still, too silent, overlooking a city whose glittering skyline had once mirrored his meteoric rise, the weight of his reality set in. The brutal truth. The empire he built, on relentless ambition, manipulation, and selective deceit, was crumbling. And Lila, the woman he had underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed, had become the catalyst. The silence was oppressive, pressing in on him from every marble corner of his once prized domain. Without Bianca's voice, without Lila's presence, without the endless calls from investors and admirers, the penthouse felt more like a museum to a man who no longer existed. He kept replaying moments, not the public ones, but the quiet ones. Lila humming in the kitchen, a forgotten inside joke. Grace's ultrasound picture on the counter, now face down. And though he had tried to bury it beneath bravado, a slow grief began to creep in. Still, Marcus couldn't decide whether he hated her, or himself more. Bianca Moreau had vanished from the penthouse, but her exit was no surrender. In a luxury suite at the Holian Hotel, she lounged in silk, sipping champagne as she scrolled through breaking news articles outlining Marcus's spiraling downfall. His name was becoming a cautionary tale. Bianca had never intended to stay on a sinking ship. Her entire existence had revolved around aligning herself with wealth and power, and she was an expert in knowing when to pivot. As Marcus's future dimmed, she orchestrated a careful exit. She wiped all digital traces of herself from his penthouse, packed every luxury gift into a safe deposit box under a pseudonym, and disappeared without a word. She had learned long ago how fast fortunes could be seized during a legal firestorm. While Marcus scrambled to salvage his reputation, Bianca was already scouting her next target. She had a Rolodex full of options: billionaires, old money heirs, discreet royals. But one name kept pulling at her curiosity: Logan Pierce, the man who had silently leveled her with a single glance at the gala. Unlike other men, Logan had not fawned over her beauty. His gaze had been cool, measured, and utterly disinterested, an anomaly for Bianca, whose looks typically opened doors before she even knocked. His presence unsettled her. He had the kind of reputation that was immune to scandal. Old money, legacy philanthropy, and a code of ethics few could penetrate. The type of man who couldn't be seduced through flattery or theatrics. And yet, Bianca felt something she rarely experienced, rejection that lingered. Not because Logan had said no, but because he hadn't needed to. It was the kind of dismissal that stung in silence, echoing through every calculating thought she tried to suppress. For a woman who thrived on control, not being seen by him was maddening. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, what if she could win him over? After all, if Marcus was finished, someone like Logan might be the next rung on the ladder. Through a quiet connection at Pierce Holdings, Bianca arranged to cross paths with Logan at a high-profile art auction. She wore black, elegant, understated, and carried herself with the calculated grace of someone unbothered by drama. But when Logan entered the gallery, he barely gave her a passing glance. He wasn't there for society games. He was bidding on behalf of a children's charity. Bianca watched from a distance, quietly seething. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't the center of the room. Bianca tried to strike up casual conversation, but Logan's responses were measured, polite, yet unmistakably distant. He knew exactly who she was, and what role she had played in Lila's heartbreak. Unfazed, Bianca decided to play her final card, sincerity. After Logan successfully bid on a painting, she caught him near the gallery exit and said softly, "I never meant to hurt Lila. Marcus told me their marriage was already over, that she was using his name for status, that she was a gold digger clinging to his wealth." Logan's eyes, cool and piercing, glinted with a flicker of contempt. "So you believed him?" he asked, voice low. "Or is that simply the version of events that made your choices easier to justify?" Bianca's cheeks reddened. "I might have been naive, I see that now, but I'm not the villain everyone thinks I am. I do care about giving back. I'm passionate about philanthropy. Maybe we could." Logan cut her off with a brisk shake of his head. "If you truly want to repair what you helped break," he said sharply, "start by apologizing to Lila. Then stay out of her life." He turned without waiting for a reply. Bianca stood frozen, watching him disappear into the crowd. Her carefully calculated plans collapsed in a single brutal moment of rejection. For the first time she understood. Logan Pierce wasn't merely indifferent to her charm, he was disgusted by it. And in a world where people like Logan wielded real influence, Bianca sensed her reign as the queen of social opportunism might be nearing its end. Meanwhile, as the SEC probe intensified, Marcus Delaney was facing a harsh new truth. He could be indicted if more damning evidence surfaced. In a final, desperate move, he requested a private meeting with Logan Pierce. Perhaps, Marcus reasoned, the man who once saw him as a rising star might still offer a lifeline, or at least remain silent if the worst came to pass. Swallowing his pride, Marcus made the call. They met inside a sleek, glass-walled conference room at an exclusive private club in downtown Boston. Marcus arrived wearing his best suit and a mask of calm confidence, but the dark circles beneath his eyes betrayed the reality. Logan was already seated, his hands calmly folded atop the polished mahogany table. His face revealed nothing. After a long pause, Marcus cleared his throat. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." Logan offered a silent nod. "You said it was urgent," Logan said coolly. "I'm listening." Marcus cleared his throat, words catching in his dry mouth. "Look, I know you disapprove of what happened with Lila, and yes, I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to lose everything. You and we have history. You once called me your protégé." Logan's expression didn't shift. "That was before you abandoned ethics and common decency." A flash of anger sparked in Marcus's eyes, but he forced it down, smoothing his tone. "I need your help. I know you have contacts, people within the regulatory agencies. If you could just put in a word, I can fix this. I'll make restitution. Whatever you ask, just don't let them bury me. I have a child on the way." Logan remained silent for a moment, his thoughts distant. His history with Marcus had evolved from admiration to disappointment, and now teetered on the edge of pity. "Do you even understand what you've done?" Logan asked at last. "To Lila? To your child? You flaunted another woman in public while your wife carried your future." Marcus's shoulders sagged. The stoic facade he had tried to wear crumbled. "Lila was always too good for me," he said quietly. "I see that now. But please, you know how this world works. If the SEC charges me, I lose everything. I won't be able to support my child. Logan exhaled, slow and deliberate. I can speak to a few people, he said finally. It might buy you time to come forward on your own terms, but this isn't a promise to clear your name. The law doesn't work like that. If you lie, if you try to manipulate the system again, you're on your own. Understood? Marcus nodded quickly, desperation in his eyes. Yes, anything. I'll cooperate. Logan leaned back, his gaze tinged with something more human. Sadness. You also owe Lila an apology. You need to reach a fair settlement for her and the baby. If you don't, I'll personally make sure every shred of evidence lands on the desk of the federal prosecutors. The words stung, but Marcus knew this was the best offer he'd get. I will. Thank you, Logan. I won't forget this. Logan rose, signaling the end of the meeting. Just don't make me regret it. Marcus left the club with a cocktail of relief and dread swirling in his gut. If he wanted redemption, he would have to earn it, by owning his failures, by making peace with Lila, and by giving up the ruthless pride that had defined his rise. For a man who had always clawed his way forward without compromise, it would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But maybe, in the wreckage of everything he once valued, Marcus Delaney could still salvage what truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, he began the rocky path of damage control. True to Logan's warning, the SEC's scrutiny didn't wane just because Marcus sought a private word with the billionaire. However, through a strategic combination of voluntary disclosures, cooperation with federal investigators, and substantial restitution to affected parties, Marcus managed to avoid the worst-case scenario, a criminal trial. A settlement was reached. It spared him prison, but the consequences were still severe. The financial penalties were massive, and the stain on his reputation was indelible. Shareholders, seeking to protect the company's future, demanded change. The board acted swiftly. Marcus was ousted as CEO, stripped of his authority and public presence. In his place, the board installed a seasoned executive from within, a level-headed leader meant to stabilize investor confidence. Marcus was offered a nominal advisory role, devoid of real influence, a symbolic post at best. The media seized on the story. Once hailed as a daring innovator, Marcus Delaney was now headline fodder, held up as a cautionary tale of ego and ethical collapse. Articles rehashed his affair, dissected his business missteps, and labeled him a fallen titan. From afar, Lila watched the events unfold with a bittersweet mix of emotions. She couldn't celebrate his downfall, not fully. She remembered the man who once tucked flowers behind her ear on slow Sunday mornings, the one who whispered big dreams and believed they could build a life worth envying. But she also bore the scars of betrayal, and those demanded justice. Their marriage was beyond repair, but for the sake of their unborn child, Lila chose a path of calm, calculated cooperation. Her legal team filed for divorce, efficiently and quietly, but also presented a settlement that ensured full financial support for the child. She didn't seek vengeance, only protection. She requested full custody, with the opportunity for Marcus to remain in the child's life, so long as he made an honest effort to change. For weeks, Marcus hesitated. He suspected an ulterior motive. But when no further sanctions came, no last-minute traps, he began to understand. Lila meant what she said. The day he signed the divorce papers, Marcus felt the weight of his decisions like never before. Not fury, not panic, but something heavier. Sorrow for what he'd destroyed. Bianca's life changed quickly too. After being rebuffed by Logan, she briefly considered courting other high-net-worth individuals, but her name was now synonymous with scandal. Doors that once opened eagerly were now firmly closed. In a bid to salvage her image, Bianca pivoted toward philanthropy. Using contacts she had cultivated during her time at Marcus's side, she launched a modest nonprofit focused on children's literacy. Critics called it a PR stunt. And perhaps, at first, it was. But whether motivated by vanity or redemption, the work offered her a chance to rebrand. In time, Bianca built a small but steady following. Still, she never recaptured the allure she once wielded in the shadow of Marcus Delaney's spotlight. As for Logan Pierce, his role as Lila's ally gradually deepened into something far more personal. What began as a friendship grounded in mutual respect and quiet empathy evolved as they spent more time together. He admired her unwavering resilience. She respected his integrity and consistent moral compass. Their conversations often drifted into shared passions, discussions on local outreach programs, community-led philanthropy, and innovative ways to empower underserved families. In those late-night calls and early morning meetings, their connection deepened, not through grand declarations, but in the gentle alignment of purpose. Lila began to realize how rare it was to be seen, not just noticed, but truly understood, and Logan had a way of doing that without words. It was during one of those talks that Lila learned what fueled Logan's drive for charity work: the tragic loss of his younger sister. That pain had shaped his mission, to make the world softer, more just, for those who needed it most. When Lila gave birth to her daughter, Grace Delaney, Logan was one of the first people to visit the hospital. He didn't arrive with grand gestures or lavish gifts, only a modest bouquet of lilies. The simplicity of it touched Lila. They sat in quiet reflection, both gazing at the tiny newborn, her eyes full of wonder. Eyes that carried the legacy of Marcus, but also the fierce will of her mother. For a fleeting moment, Lila imagined the kind of future she could build, not one tied to wealth or scandal, but grounded in honesty and quiet strength. The way Logan looked at Grace as if she were already someone worth cheering for, undid something knotted in her chest. In those moments, Lila felt the gravity of motherhood settle into her bones. Over the months that followed, Marcus attempted to redeem himself in the only way left to him: as a father. At first, his visits were supervised. He held Grace with trembling arms, the weight of his mistakes manifesting in every cautious movement. Tears welled up, whether from guilt, sorrow, or something deeper, Lila couldn't be sure. But she chose to give him the space to build a relationship with their child. He never once asked for a second chance at their marriage. Perhaps he finally understood the finality of his actions. Instead, he focused on showing up. For Grace, if not for Lila. Some days were easier than others. In a surprising turn, Marcus began therapy. At first it felt alien, but slowly he opened up, unpacking the deep-seated insecurities that had driven his need for dominance and control. He spoke of childhood pressures, a longing for validation, and the blind ambition that had cost him the people who once mattered most. His progress was slow, but genuine. Though the business world still viewed him with suspicion, Marcus found pockets of opportunity among startups and second-chance ventures. Eventually, he took a consulting role with a small tech firm in Seattle. He traveled back on weekends to visit Grace, quietly, without spectacle. Lila, meanwhile, flourished. Liberated from a marriage that had once dimmed her light, she leaned into her passions. Together with Moran DuPont, she launched a new initiative, Heart to Heart, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women facing pregnancy alone or navigating emotional turmoil in domestic life. The work gave her a sense of healing she hadn't expected. Every letter from a woman helped by the program felt like a quiet affirmation. Her pain had a purpose. Her story could light someone else's way. It was a mission rooted in her own experiences, and a beacon for others finding strength in adversity. The mission behind Heart to Heart struck a deep chord with Lila. It was a reflection of her own transformation. Donations began to pour in, bolstered by endorsements from public figures and support from Logan Pierce's vast philanthropic network. As their joint appearances increased, so did the whispers. Blogs and society columns buzzed with speculation. Was there a romance blooming between the reclusive billionaire and the newly single mother? For a long while, Lila said nothing. Part of her wasn't sure how she felt either. She treasured Logan's friendship, his unwavering steadiness, the quiet strength he brought into her life. And yet, something had changed. There were moments she found herself thinking of him long after he left. The way he spoke about people with empathy, the way he never flinched when she shared her fears. It chipped away at the guarded edges she hadn't realized she still carried. A spark, new and tentative, had begun to grow, not from scandal, but from admiration, understanding, and time. It crystallized one brisk autumn afternoon, months after Grace's birth. Logan had invited Lila to tour a new community center he was funding in a struggling neighborhood. They strolled the corridors, discussing expansion plans for counseling rooms and childcare services. Their hands brushed accidentally. Lila glanced up and found something unmistakable in Logan's eyes. A gentle warmth, something real. No words were exchanged. None were needed. That quiet moment marked a turning point. They didn't rush it. Both of them carried wounds, Lila from betrayal, Logan from grief. Logan let her lead the pace. Their first official date was refreshingly simple. Dinner at a small Italian restaurant tucked away from the city's glittering chaos. Over pasta and candlelight, they opened up about their values, their regrets, and their dreams for a quieter, more meaningful life. It wasn't fireworks, it was clarity. The kind of steady affection that grows between people who have known loss and chosen to love anyway. Even as her heart opened again, Lila's priority remained Grace. She was determined to raise her daughter in an environment built on stability, love, and truth. Surprisingly, Marcus occasionally showed signs of growth. One morning, Lila received a brief message from him. "Thank you for letting me be part of Grace's life. I won't fail her the way I failed you." The words were heavy, tinged with remorse and perhaps sincerity. Lila stared at the message longer than she expected, not because she longed for what was lost, but because the acknowledgement, however small, brought a sliver of closure. It didn't change the past, but it acknowledged it. And that meant something. As with all scandals, the media eventually moved on, chasing fresher controversies and newer celebrities. Lila's story became a footnote, the mother who stood tall during a public betrayal and came out stronger. But her real story wasn't in the headlines. It lived in quiet days filled with purpose, in raising a daughter with love, in building something honest with a man who respected her journey. Marcus Delaney's downfall eventually settled into the past, a reminder that unchecked ambition, stripped of loyalty and truth, is a fragile empire. Bianca Morrow learned the hard way that ambition without substance meets its limits when confronted by someone like Logan Pierce. And Lila? She found her voice and vowed never again to let it be drowned out by someone else's selfishness or fear. Years passed, and the bond between Lila and Logan deepened, quietly, steadily, into something lasting, something earned. When Grace took her first steps, Logan was there, cheering with the same joy as Lila. He never tried to take Marcus's place. Marcus remained Grace's biological father and retained that role in her life. But Logan brought out something else, gentle, steady guidance and a paternal warmth that felt natural, never forced. At public events or school functions, the dynamic between all three adults was surprisingly calm. Marcus, humbled by time and consequence, came to value Logan's role, not out of affection, but out of respect. Logan's unwavering support ensured that both Lila and Grace thrived in a stable, loving environment. Eventually, Logan proposed. It wasn't in front of cameras or amid grandeur. Just a quiet, candlelit dinner at his countryside estate, with Grace tucked away asleep upstairs in the nursery. He knelt, holding out a modest ring. Lila's eyes welled with tears. She remembered everything that had led her here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights of doubt. And now, a man who had stood beside her through it all, asking for forever. She said yes, without hesitation. For weeks, the engagement remained a closely guarded secret, shared only with a tight circle of friends and family. When the news finally surfaced, it caused surprisingly little stir. By that time, Lila had carved out her own name, no longer just a footnote in a scandal, but a respected figure in nonprofit work. And Logan? He was already revered as a model of ethical wealth. Their engagement wasn't gossip, it was a statement, a celebration of dignity, resilience, and second chances. They married on a sunlit spring afternoon in a tranquil garden at Moran DuPont's estate. Grace scattered petals down the aisle, her face beaming. Marcus stood quietly at the back. He came not to make a scene, but to show up for Grace. Before leaving, he offered a respectful nod to Logan and whispered something to Lila. "I'm truly happy for you." Lila held Logan's hand tighter. They both understood the layered emotions of the day. It was more than a wedding. It was closure. And a beginning. The heartbreak that once threatened to consume Lila had led her to something unexpected. Peace, partnership, and purpose. So our story has finally come to a close. And you, our wonderful friend, if you're still here with us right now, it means something about this story touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength, or perhaps it gave you a moment of quiet reflection. Either way, let's take a moment together. Not to judge, not to label right or wrong, but to just look at what this journey has shown us. At its core, this story isn't just about betrayal or scandal, it's about resilience. about a woman who, in the face of public humiliation and personal heartbreak, chose not to break but to stand taller. It's about finding quiet strength, building new foundations, and allowing healing to grow where pain once lived. The Stoics had a beautiful way of looking at hardship. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Lila's path wasn't easy, but each obstacle she faced led her closer to something more authentic. A life rooted in truth, not illusion. This isn't just fiction. This is a mirror to so many of our own lives, where we're forced to choose between staying silent or speaking up, between bitterness and growth. So if this story resonated with you, let it remind you that no setback is final. That dignity, like Lila's, is a quiet power. That love, when grounded in respect and understanding, can grow even after the darkest nights. If you're here, feeling even a little moved, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to our channel. Stories like these are more than entertainment. They're little lifelines reminding us we're not alone in our pain or in our hope. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's more powerful than you know.